from your standpoint, as it relates to the buyer's agency agreement? Any specific questions that you have?
No, and I've gotten through a couple of them, but I find that like it's like anything in life when you're kind of put to the ground, like do it quick, do it quick, do it quick. I'm not as comfortable as I'd like to be.
Okay.
So which in try to suggest that just kind of going through it, doing these classes constantly, and just the more you see it, the better you can do it. I want to be able to do it in my sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. All right, so I'm gonna throw it up on here, share my screen. You should be seeing it now. All right, yeah. So typically what'll happen is, as always, we'll get into conversation, and in the event you have any questions, let me know. It'll always, everything will be a reminder of something that's currently come up, within the last couple of weeks that reminds me to talk about. So we'll just go through it on each one of them. So first part of the agreement, first two parts of the agreement, fairly self-explanatory. Obviously, this is the contract between the buyer and the broker in charge of Keller Williams. Again, broker as buyer's exclusive agent, right? So you sign this. It is actually a relationship that they have with the brokerage. So that would also kind of assume that, hold on, assume that you have gone through the explanation of agency, right? You've gone through the disclosure of agency on there, and you've gone through that. As far as the purpose of the agency, a lot of people try to stay general on this. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself in there. You put in there something like general descriptions, James Island, Johns Island, buying a house in West Ashley with a new construction agent, may have yourself a little bit of opportunity for them to quote unquote get out of it. And again, the goal is not to keep people from getting out of it. It's more to hope to understand it at a level that everyone is. So if I'm explaining this to you as the buyer, say, John, this is basically a general description. I know you guys are looking for a single family detached. You're looking in the general Charleston area. This is your, approximate price range. You put that in there. It is a little bit of, in my opinion, this is a little bit of a dated paragraph because it does seem to be, it's still an exclusive right to buy, right, that they're signing. So I don't know what the purpose would be of having this narrowed down, other than now what some people would say on the flip side is if you're working with a buyer that's looking here and Myrtle Beach per se, right, and they've got an agent up there that, if they wanted to have an exclusive right to buy, technically they'd only be able to have it with one brokerage. However, as long as they were full disclosure and they say, John, I'm working with you here, but I'm also working with Jake Lee in the Myrtle Beach office, that's maybe you would put specific terms here that would help separate those. The broker's duties, again, the reason that I like this is this can give you, the more you read through this, the better you are at explaining kind of what you're doing as a buyer's agent, right? It kind of helps translate. I don't know if you've been to Lynn's buyer consultation class. There'll be another one coming up in a couple of weeks. I would highly recommend go to it because she definitely explains the process from here forward more than anything. It's less contractual and more like duties, so to speak. But you walk through this, it helps you explain. It also kind of helps you set the expectation. The broker shall provide a buyer meaningful explanation of agency. So by the way, if you're truly walking them through this contract before they sign it versus just giving it to them when they jump on, when they submit an offer and it's like all part of the documents, then you want to be careful that it's not that you haven't not explained the agency to them, if that's the correct way to put it. So you explain immediate explanation of agency. They use the broker's professional real estate knowledge and skills to represent the buyer in a diligent and effective manner to locate a property which is available. Now, that's one thing that you do, right? This isn't the only thing that you do. Next is, if the broker is not representing the seller, the broker shall represent solely the interest of the buyer in the negotiations. Again, will help you in the agency discussion, as your exclusive agent, unless I'm, working with the seller. And I don't know if you work with sellers. However, if it were a team listing for you, John, it would be, you at this point could say this would be where we have what we call disclosed dual agency. And here's why I still am never able to represent you at a high level. And then here are just some of the disclosure things that we go through. If the broker represents the seller, we go through this, the broker shall not disclose the buyer information obtained within the confidentiality and trust of the fiduciary relationship with the seller, nor disclose to the seller information similarly obtained from the buyer without the consent of the party adversely affected by the disclosure. I think it's important to understand that part because it's, a lot of people are real afraid of dual agency. You know, because their clients don't like it. And I think a lot of times they don't like it because they don't truly understand. A lot of people say it's a lower form of representation, not lower form, but you know what I mean? It's not as high representation. And I could see where that argument could come in because, you know, let's say you're in this market right now, you're representing the buyer and the seller in a negotiation that would be a little difficult. But I do think it's important to say, look, I'm legally bound to not disclose information that adversely affects you unless you've given me permission to do so. And that's really where the concern comes in. So, you know, if I'm talking, you know, if Laura's my buyer, the client, she's got some concerns that I'm not going to be able to represent her very well because I want to get the highest and best for my seller. It's like, well, no, I'm going to communicate. At the end of the day, you guys are going to decide. Laura is the buyer, John is the seller. You guys are going to decide whether or not you're willing to pay that much for the house and whether or not they're willing to take that much for the house. You know, I'm going to relay the information. I'm going to share with you the information here. But if you're telling me, hey, I just can't go a dime higher than 550 because of these X reasons, I'm not going to tell the seller that, right? Unless it, you know, and hurt in there. And then on the flip side, same thing. So. And then last one, D, the broker may represent other buyers who may be interested in the same property as the buyer upon the termination or completion of this agreement. Well, before I go on that one, it's important to point this out. And then we just recently had this, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you know, do want to let you know that I am working with other buyers that are, you know, in this same general area, general location. So I may have other buyers that'll be interested in the same home as you. You know, when that comes about, I will let you know for full disclosure. Just so you're aware, but you know, at the end of the day, I am going to advocate for each one of those buyers as much as possible. At the end of the day, it's transaction's only going to happen if the buyer agrees and the seller agrees with each other. Yeah. I have been asked if this is okay for the only time to disclose that. I mean, this is the only time you technically need to because you have disclosed it. But if you get into an offer situation where you know you're in multiple offers and you represent, you know, more than one of the buyers, I don't think it's a terrible idea for you to say, again, I just want to let you know from full disclosure, this is multiple offer situation. And just like in dual agency, I'm not, you know, I'm not going to say anything to that other buyer that adversely affects you or anything like that, but I just wanted to be fully transparent with you.
Yeah, and in this market right now where everybody has a bunch of buyers and there's only so much property to sell, that's an important thing to do ahead of time, right? And kind of talk to them about.
Agreed. So and then the last part of this first paragraph in section 3 is basically upon the termination or completion of this agreement, the broker shall keep confidential all information received during the course of this agreement, which is made confidential by written request or instructions from the client, except as provided under South Carolina law. Let's see, last part of this, broker represents that they are duly licensed under the laws of South Carolina. So it's really all legal disclaimer. The broker will give buyer information describing and identify the properties that appeal to the broker to substantially meet their conditions set forth in section 2. So again, if you more of a conversation than a compliance with the contract, you want to make sure you do have a good understanding of what it is they're looking for. And sometimes, you know, if I'm working with you, John, as a buyer, I'm gonna say sometimes you may get houses. I mean, this isn't as much of an issue in this current market because let's be honest, the buyers are finding the houses just as quickly as we are. But in the event I do send you some homes that are outside your criteria, here is why. And if we need to narrow the search down, we're, you know, more than happy to do so. So that's my duties to you as the broker. Now here's your duties to me as the buyer. The first thing is to work exclusively with me as by signing this. Which means that you will do this by viewing any properties, previewing only with the broker or any designated representative. So if I obviously want to be the one to show you the house in the event there's a conflict in our schedule, I'll have a colleague of mine or someone who will also do so. Exclusively allowing the broker salesperson to identify property, negotiate for buyer, and otherwise represent buyer. That's a little hard one to kind of exclude that they're going to be the only one to identify the property as the agent, because I mean, if you're a home buyer right now, it's basically like late night on Zillow kind of thing. And we come in the morning with a list of properties they want to see. Referring to the broker on all inquiries received in any form from any other real estate broker or affiliated license. So if you do hear of other properties that come on the market or anything like that, if I haven't sent it to you yet, it's either because for whatever reason didn't fit in the criteria or it's just recently been released. So just let me know on these. We'll make sure we get you in the door. Just, you know, bring me in on communication. By the way, this would also would have also to do with any sort of for sale by owner situation, any of those, that if you do, I'm happy to work you through a for sale by owner. 9 times out of 10, we get the commission worked out just fine. Commission's never going to get in the in the way of the home of your dreams. So, just to keep that communication open and above board, I want to be the first point of contact on there. So if you drive past 123 Main, that's for sale by owner, snap a picture of it, send it to me. We'll set up a showing and get you out there. Number 4, hold the broker harmless for any liability as a result of incomplete and inaccurate information provided to broker by buyer or the seller. So basically, if I'm given false information, I'm just relaying false information. And then also holding harmless from liability the results of the seller's failure to provide a complete seller's property condition disclosure statement. And last one, identifying the broker against all claims, damages, losses, expenses, or liability arising from the handling of earnest money by anyone other than the broker, which for us would be any earnest money. The second part is you're going to assist me as the broker and the licensees in the process of identifying, negotiating your contract of purchase by providing me with reliable information, right? So, and when I say me, this is also going to be your lender, right? Or any other party that's part of the transaction, right? We're all going to be working on this together. You're going to make yourself available to meet in order to see properties. Again, this isn't necessarily how you have to explain the contract. You can always just use the contract as an outline. So the script for this would be, here's other ways that we'll work together. Make sure that when we get the information to the lender, it's accurate, it's up to date, they need everything, so we make sure we're not causing any delays. And then in addition to that, in this market, we do have to unfortunately be a little bit more drop of the hat to go see a property if we need to. So, as much as you can, Mr. Buyer, make yourself available so we can go see the properties, so we can move forward on them should they be the property that you want to buy. Provide broker and its license the following information. So general nature, location, again, you'll get this through your buyer consultation. This would be part of the contract that I wouldn't go into a lot of detail when I'm explaining it to my buyer because I've already done most of it by saying, by going through a consultation and that sort of thing. Authorize the buyer's attorney and settlement agent to furnish broker the copies of the final settlement statement. This again is something you just want to have on your checklist to make sure that they understand that you will be given a copy of the settlement statement and that this is where they're agreeing to it. You would be surprised. We've seen it where, we've had an agent that's received this or an agent that's, try to get financial information from their clients and their clients get real weird about it for whatever reason. Again, I'm not here to debate whether or not they should have gotten weird. It just shouldn't have been the first time that they were aware of the fact that we as their agent will possibly be asking for it, right? So if you would address that up front, gives you a little less of an opportunity for them to say, hey, I'm not comfortable giving this to you, right? All right, questions so far on page 1?
No, and it seems to a lot with this market as crazy it is, like you said, explaining it all up front, it just makes your life so much easier from the very beginning. So no questions so far. Everything's going well.
Awesome. How about anybody else? We got a crowd that came in. Hi, Laura. All right, so page 2, compensation of broker. Broker's fees will be deemed earned when the buyer is under contract to purchase any property presented by the broker or negotiated by the buyer. Again, so basically you've earned it when you're going under contract. It technically says here that you've earned the commission by going under contract. Whether or not they default on it, if you're going to try to go after them for commissions, I don't know if that's really the battle that I'm going to fight right now. So they're paid in 2 different ways, with 2 different options under 2 different ways. So that would mean obviously 4 different ways. First is a brokerage fee, right? Brokerage fee is one of 2. I'm going to go to number 2 first, because that's the easiest one to explain. Option 2 under the brokerage fee is that I, as the broker, shall obtain payment of the brokerage fee out of the transaction. So whatever the transaction's offering, that's what I'm going to take. So if I, that includes if I go to a for sale by owner, if I can't negotiate the payment from them for sale by owner, then, or if I can't negotiate a good payment from the for sale by owner, whatever that may be, then that's the risk I'm taking by going with option number 2. Okay. Option number 1 is one that we are starting to see a lot more of right now, and I don't know how long that trend is going to last, or if it's really even a trend. It may just be what we're doing now. And this is where the buyer is going to pay the transaction fee, which is the greater of either a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase to total lease price. Meaning, let's just say, use for example, we put 3% in here. This is basically saying if you work with me and then I go, we identify a home that you want to go under contract on, they're offering out 2.5%, then you as the buyer will owe me the difference, right? You'll pay the difference on there. Now, the reason I spend some time on this is if you're a listing agent that's not offering out 3% and a buyer's agent calls you and says, hey, are you willing to pay 3%? Because if my buyer purchases this house, all things else considered the same, it will cost them more to purchase this house than it would be the one down the street who is offering 3%. There's nothing wrong with the buyer's agent making that phone call. I mean, a lot of people freaking out about it right now. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, the buyer's agent can't say, I'm not going to show it if you don't pay me the 3%, right? You can't, that's where the no-no is. But if you're calling and saying, hey, are you willing to pay 3%? That's honestly, I know buyer's agents that'll do that now, regardless of whether or not they have option 1 checked, right? Some of them just do it because they want to see if it's a negotiation in their mind. I'm not here to say whether or not it's good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. It's the beauty of us being able to run our own businesses. Just know though, if you're a listing agent and you get called on this and someone says, hey, are you willing to offer more than X? Because I have a buyer's agency agreement that guarantees me Y, that's totally within their right to do so.
So Joseph, that doesn't make sense to me. Why would somebody throw that out there and start haggling if they really haven't had option 1 signed?
Just to see if they can get, just to ask to say, are you willing to pay me 3% versus 2.5? It's just, it's honestly, there are a lot of listing agents that I know of that typically offer out 2.5%. And I've heard a lot of times just from a phone call from a potential buyer's agent that they are willing to pay the 3%.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
no,
then
I'm not saying lie about it, right? I mean, if you don't have option 1 checked, then don't base it on being option 1. You can just call and say, are you willing to pay 3%? Now, I also know on the flip side that people have option 1 in here because they do want to use that as a negotiation for their commission, but don't always opt to hold their buyers to it. Again, it's your contract you're making with a buyer, so it's whether or not you want to do that. I don't have an opinion strong opinion one way or the other on that. So questions about the brokerage fee? All right, so the second part, retainer fee. This one's just really, really super confusing, to be honest with you.
I have a question for you, Joseph.
Okay.
What are you seeing as a trend in compensation in this current market? I don't think there's really an argument that it's not being compressed. I do think that I've seen a trend from the very beginning that agents who don't negotiate well for their commission on the seller side then pass that terrible negotiation off to the buyer's agent. Mm-hmm.
I've never loved that. Right. I've never loved that. Now, now that's not to say there are some very good, strong listing agents out there that always charge 5%, do 2.5. That's just how they run the business. That's a different story, in my opinion, than someone who just, didn't know how to ask for the commission correctly. But you are starting to see a drive in that. And there's also a big drive on a national level to prevent it from becoming an issue in that, starting actually today, June 1, I think, or maybe it's not fully in effect yet. There are certain MLSs that are not going to allow you to search by compensation. Like you can't narrow your search based on a compensation to the buyer's agent. All buyer's agent compensation will be public record on all of the syndicated sites, right? So, they want the public to know, because what's happening is there's a 2-part discussion. What's happening is there's this whole trend, and it was a script that was taught for a long, long time, which was you work for me, I work for you for free. And the NAR is like, no, that's not at all how this works. The buyer's writing a very large check to purchase the house. And yes, your commission is technically paid from what the seller's agent negotiated, but you're still getting paid out of the proceeds from the house. If that were free, then it would truly be free. So NAR's actually been cracking down on people using that as a marketing tool of, hey, work for me for no cost. They're not allowing that. It used to also be
Laura, we used to, and Anton and I used to run these stats all the time because it was a strong, like whenever I, as a listing agent, if someone tried to negotiate the commission, and we have pretty much from the beginning, and I've had a pretty strict, like if we do take a discount for whatever reason we take it, we're still going to offer out 3% regardless. We've just always done that. And a good help into that negotiation as a listing agent was we could show you statistics where I think at one time it got to where like only 12% of the listings in the market offered out less than 3%. And then only like 6 or 7% of the homes that sold were offering out less than 3%. So you could show a strong argument that you had this many that were offering it, but only this many that were actually selling. Mm-hmm. You can't really show that anymore. It statistically doesn't make a difference, right? Because buyers, and again, from a consumer standpoint, that's how it should be. I mean, it really is, because the buyers, because what that indicates pretty much, I mean, I'm speaking in a broad brush here, but what that does indicate is that the agents are driving that probably more than the buyers. Now, one could argue if the agent is offering out less than that, it's because they don't negotiate well, and they're probably not marketing the property well as also. Mm-hmm. Anyway, long story short, soapbox rant ended. There's really no statistical proof that offering 3 versus 2.5 is a better idea strategically for your seller.
So you're not saying at this point it's something we need to get used to?
What, the compression of it?
Yeah.
I do think it's something we need to get used to.
Damn it.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk of, having agents. I mean, I do think we're going to probably over time, I don't know how long, but, will probably be more pressure to have some sort of option 1 from your buyers. If not, that it all being paid from the buyers at one point. I think we're a ways away from that. We're very spoiled in this market in that it's always been split down the middle for the most part, right? I mean, it's always been negotiable. There are some MLSs and areas like in the Raleigh area. I can't remember which different MLSs, but if it's like it was, I can't remember if it was 6% or what, but it was like 6%, 2.4 to the buyer agent, 3.6 to the listing agent. Right, the listing agents they've just always made more, and that was just how it is. And then if you came in, there's another area too. If you came in from a neighboring MLS, if you were part of this MLS, you made X amount, and if you're part of this MLS, you made Y amount. So it's always been kind of crazy. But I do think what else is interesting is there hasn't been statistically, if we look at the multi-year trends in the offices, there hasn't been a noticeable compression yet of the percentage. We're still hovering at about 2.7% of per transaction percentage. However, it only goes 1 decimal point. So a lot of people are wondering, has that gone from like 2.79 down to 2.71? Probably. All right, so then there are the fees, the retainer fee, which is basically due and payable about signing this, right? You're going to pay me a retainer fee upfront, okay? And this shall or shall not be credited against the brokerage fee. So if you pay me $1,000 upfront, that means if you had a brokerage fee up here that was being paid, it would be credited against it and you wouldn't owe it to me. Typically, if you are doing a retainer fee, people are not having it credited against the brokerage fee, because then you have to find a way to rebate it to them on the settlement statement, which if you want to do, you completely can. And then there's a service fee, which basically is the buyer shall pay the broker a service fee to be paid on blank calendar days, whether or not the buyer purchases any property, right? So this would be a service fee that's not paid at the beginning. It would be paid within blank, after a certain amount of time. You could also have it paid at closing. The service fee shall be the only fee due to broker from buyer under the terms of this contract. That would be, yes, that's all the buyer would have to pay to you, but it does not mean you would then not make the option to brokerage fee up here, right? The service fee shall be credited against the brokerage fee described above and shall be kept by broker whether or not the brokerage fee is earned. So again, it's the same thing, the service fee is being paid. And then the last one, service fee shall be credited against the brokerage fee described above and shall be kept by broker whether or not the brokerage fee is earned, unless the buyer enters to a purchase and sale agreement. In the event that buyer enters into a purchase and sale agreement, Buyer and broker agree that the above service fee will be credited against the brokerage fee in subsection A above. Right. So again, if you have a brokerage fee, this last one says if you do go to closing, then it'll be credited against that. Very confusing stuff on the service fee. Right. But a lot of people will have a simple service fee that's in addition to, you know, there's a lot of local teams that'll have it, you know, $1,000 for a service fee, whatever it may be. All right. Any questions about the, I'll jump off share screen here. Any questions about the compensation in the buyer agency agreement?
I have a question. That one, Joseph, the one you're just talking about.
Mhm.
Give me an example of how that works. That seems like something that I've never seen just personally, where someone's saying you're going to pay me even if you don't buy a house. Is that
Yeah.
common?
Not common, no. But there are practice. I mean, some agents have had a practice in a while that they do have a retainer fee or a service fee that says, you know, if to work with me, you do pay a certain amount up front.
That be someone who's, you know, has a big name for themselves that's out
Yeah,
there.
I mean, it depends on, I know a lot of people, there's not a lot of people in this market that do it. I know a lot of people in Myrtle Beach do it because they've got a lot of out of town buyers that come in and they just finally got to a point where they were tired of people coming in on their vacation and going to look at houses. So
Okay.
they would start to commit to that more. Same in Florida when I was down there. So yeah, it's just up to kind of how you want to run in your business. Now, here is the thing is if it's credited against your brokerage fee at the end, then you get it back technically. So there's not a super big risk and it's more of a commitment at that point from the buyer to say, yeah, I'm committed to this.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Let's jump back in. So we're going down to the terms of the agency. Again, the term of the agency is basically when they sign it. It's going to start on blank date and end at 11:59 on other blank date. I always suggest on any agency agreements, buyers or sellers, that you always have you try to stick with a system where everything expires on like 1 or 2 dates out of the year, maybe quarterly. I still think that's too many, but like our listing agreements always expire at the end of June or the end of December, right? Buyers agency agreements always expire at the end of June and end of December. And the reason for that is that way we know we only have 2 times a year we have to worry about going through and seeing what agency agreements expire versus each month saying, okay, it's the end of the month. Do we have any listing agreements expiring or do we have any buyer agency agreements expiring? That's just, again, that was a business practice that we took on because I heard somebody talk about it. It was a lot easier to manage. Because if you get busy and you get a good listing inventory or you get a good buyer inventory and you're not paying attention, nobody likes getting the seller that calls June 1st because for whatever reason you picked May 31st as the expiration date. Or maybe hypothetically speaking, if you're a listing agent and you put in the 30th thinking it was only a 30-day month and it was actually a 31-day month, so you didn't think about it, and then on the 31st they were getting a ton of phone calls. That was a fun one too. Also, one of the few reasons that many reasons that they listed of why they were unhappy with us and fired us. So every little thing counts. It's a waterfront property in Dunes West, but I'm over it. I'm over it. His name was Steve. No, I'm just kidding. No, but true story though. He was like, dude, like really the agreement, the end date on the agreement, like that's a detail you shouldn't be missing. And he was absolutely right. He was absolutely right. So I think he overreacted, but whatever. All right. Consent to dual agency, designated agency. So again, this is where they'll initial that you've shared with them the information that was in the disclosure of agency agreement. So the first part is they're acknowledging that you've explained that. So this would be a good time to not have to say, oh, by the way, I need to explain this to you, right? That's why it's important. This is kind of an account. I use this sentence as an accountability because every little bit counts, right? So you don't want to be at this point like, oh yeah, I forgot. Let's go talk about this. Now you can also say, before I go into this next part, if you haven't, you should have already done it. But if you haven't, you at this part could say, let me pause for a second and go into this designate or this disclosure of agencies in South Carolina. Okay. And then you go through that. And then give permission to act as dual agency will not be considered. And then permission to act as a dual agency may be considered at the time I'm provided with information about the other party to a transaction. If the buyer agrees, the buyer will execute a separate written dual agency agreement. So it's important to know how this is written, because this isn't, they still have the choice to say no, right? They don't have to, you know, it's not a simple, yes, I'm always going to do it, or no, it's a simple, no, I'm never going to do it. But it's not a simple, yes, I'm always going to do it. Right. So, you know, you may have a situation when you explained it to them properly to say, look, and the same thing would happen here on the designated agency side. This is going to happen more on this side. Right. Yeah, I would be open to it if it's designated agency, because Laura is the buyer's agent and let's say Trad or John are the listing agent. Well, that's designated agencies, but those two don't know each other. Right. It's just designated agency because they're under the same broker in charge. I'm not going to have any heartburn over that over the buyer. Now, if I'm the buyer and, you know, I've known John for 10 years and we're super close, and then he's representing me, and then he's got this seller that he's known, he's super close with, and there's just no way he can be impartial in this or whatever, I may not be comfortable with that one. So at that point, I might make the decision to say, no, I wouldn't want to do this. Right. So again, it's just important to know that they're not committing to it in a just a blanket statement that they're going to do it. All right, other potential buyers. Paragraph 8, section 8, literally it's another disclosure of this. Buyer understands that other potential buyers have entered into a similar agency contract with the broker, which may involve the purchase or lease through the broker of same or similar properties. So again, just a second time to disclose this. And just let you know that by working with me, I am working with other buyers. This is just to let you know that I will have people that are looking at the same property, possibly. Indemnification of the broker. Buyer promises to disclose to the broker whether the buyer has signed any agency agreement with any other broker or has been given prior information about any property that's subject to. Basically, at this point, this is where they're saying, hey, I have not signed anything with another agent. By signing this, as I'm attesting to that. Now, it has come up a handful of times right now or recently where, and I'm not here to debate why it happened or what happened. I mean, sometimes it's as weird as again, they were writing an offer to submit it in this market, and they threw in there the buyer's agency agreement, and they didn't like how it was handled, and they were annoyed that they even had to sign a buyer's agency agreement. Okay, it's either that, or sometimes it's, hey, this was clearly, I was working with someone, we didn't work well together, and I want to separate from them, right? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. They're saying they haven't signed one. If they have, you will have to they will have to themselves contact the other agent and talk to them about what their options are with their current buyer agency agreement. Just because we allow people out of ours, should you decide to do so, I'm not saying that's a company policy. So a lot of people don't just freely let buyers agents or buyers out of their agreements. That's fine. But if you don't, and you've in the past have let buyers out of a buyer agency agreement, you want to be really careful of saying anything like, well, I mean, I let anybody out, so they should too. That can get you in hot water. You just want to say, Laura, what we'll need to do is, I mean, you'll need to contact your broker, contact the agent, and find out if you have any options on it. And I'm sure we'll be able to work this out manageably, amicably, whatever it may be. We've had situations where, we've offered to pay a buyer, the other agent, a referral fee if they bought one of the houses that they had shown them. It's really not happening in this market right now, because if they bought one of the houses that they were showing them, that house would have sold when they should have. So, but it's something you can do. Now, if in the event, we've got one right now where the agent's ghosting the buyer, and that's kind of hard for us to say, well, we're going to move forward with you working with us, but you don't have any termination in place. If that happens, reach out to me. We've got a couple different ways we can handle that. Disclosure of the buyer's identity and confidentiality. So if you're rich, famous, and popular like John, you don't want people to know who you are. You could use paragraph 10 here to say, hey, I'm going to remain confident or anonymous. You could do this a couple different ways. If you ever get into this, we've had a couple of these. Honestly, I could count on one hand how many times I've had this since I've been a broker. High net worth clients are a big one on this. Celebrity clients, in the event you were to have some. You can have a couple different ways that's done. They can buy it in an LLC. They can have a straw buyer. If it's a straw buyer, it's something you'd want to get the attorney involved with ahead of time. And then obviously you want to have all the information. So if you are submitting an offer from an anonymous buyer or an LLC that doesn't want to be, identified, you need to be able to tactfully disclose that to them. We've had situations where we actually did have we personally had one who did not want to be disclosed, and they asked it, but they were fine on one property because they knew the seller. They were fine that we disclosed to the seller directly, but they didn't want the agent to know. And the agent was like, that's fine, whatever. Laura, actually, that same buyer I showed your listing that you had on Sullivan's. Yeah. It wasn't that house, obviously, because you were there with us, so you knew who he was. But yeah, it was, anyway, it was silly.
That's interesting.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah, that really is.
Drove by that house the other day. I would say that's the house that I showed Laura with Eric. He was walking through it was this historic property, or not, it was a historic property. It was this gorgeous property right on the entrance to Charleston Harbor. And the buyer was a younger guy, made a lot of money in the tech world. And he was walking through the house talking about all the stuff he wanted to tear down. I was like, oh my gosh, like, stop talking.
And remember, it was Dorothea Denton Franks that actually bought the house.
Oh, that's right.
She's the author.
Oh my God, that's crazy. All right, so broker limited liability or broker liability limitation. We have had some pushback on this, to be honest with you. And so if you do see me, very few of these paragraphs are hills I'm going to die on if it means working with a quality buyer, right? But this one, what it says, buyer agrees broker provided buyer with benefit services, yada, yada, yada. Buyer agrees that he shall pay broker's attorney's fees, and that broker shall not be liable to the buyer in the amount exceeding the broker's compensation by reason of any act of omission, including negligence, misrepresentation, errors in omission, breach of undertaking, except in intentional or willful acts. Basically, a lot of this is saying that if something goes wrong and I get brought in as the buyer's agent or the buyer's broker, that you're not going to hold me liable and you will pay my attorney's fees for it. There are very few, I shouldn't say very few, because not a lot of people. We've had a handful in the last few months, buyers that look at this, particularly high net worth buyers, that are like, I'm not signing this. This is basically saying if you mess up, you're not going to be held accountable and I'm going to pay for your attorney's fees. Like, that's not what it's really saying. However, we've had our attorney review this. Listen, a hold harmless is not going to prevent you from being sued anyway. So if a buyer doesn't love this, it's not the end of the world if they want to strike it. So if you do come across that, just let me know and we'll make sure we understand fully. I will tell you that buyers that are that particular and that close to detail, that is not a red flag, it's a flag. That just simply maybe keep an eye on this personality.
It's red. It's red.
It could be red. Paragraph 12, section 12, we don't discriminate. This does need to, what's the date on this one? Yeah, they still need to update this one. It's basically non-discrimination against anyone that's protected by fair housing, which this is missing a couple of those protected classes in there. So it's not just limited to this. It's basically all protected classes. Professional counsel basically says that I'm a broker. I'm here as a real estate agent, not as an attorney, a tax advisor, appraiser, lender, surveyor, structural engineer. That we're going to bring this paragraph is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important paragraphs of setting the proper expectation of your role in the transaction, right? So I'm sitting down, I'm going to say, Laura, here's where we are. I'm your real estate agent, and I'm going to connect you with all the professionals. Should you need it, you may know all these people, but I'm going to be the liaison between all the professionals. And I want you to understand that, for instance, I am not a home inspector. Now, I'm going to connect you with a really good home inspector. You guys are going to have a great communication. I'm going to stay involved, but he's going to be the go-to when we have questions on the condition of the home, right? And the lender, same thing. They're going to be the go-to when it comes to what's going on with financing. Same with your tax guy. If you do have specific questions there, the attorney is going to be on the legal side of things. Here's why I say this is all too often, one of the underlying foundational reasons that cause problems between us and our clients, not even with other agents, not even in the transaction, us and our client, is we try to be the everyone to everything, right? And everything to everyone. And what that means is all of a sudden I'm, working with Laura as the buyer, and then I'm making sure I see that, everything through the eyes of the inspector. I'm relaying over here and I'm saying things like, yeah, and he said this wasn't a big deal and that this would be the thing. No, like, Laura, the home inspector he's the go-to guy in this one. The attorney's the go-to person in this one. Your lender's the go-to person in this one. It's not to say I'm just handing you off. We will work hand in hand on this, because what happens when something goes wrong, what I have found 9 times out of 10, when something goes wrong with the center of the hub agent, that's what we'll identify this agent as. When the client and the actual person who's the professional of that situation finally connect, all the problems go away, right? Because they're like, now I get it, right? And again, I'm not saying it's anything other than just, I get it. We want to be involved in everything and we want to earn our keep, so to speak. But it says multiple times in these contracts that we are not anything outside of being a real estate agent. So we just need to be careful on that. All right, jumping back on. All right, mediation clause says, anytime that we do get into a dispute, you and me as the buyer and me as your agent, we, instead of suing each other, we have an option to mediate first. Mediation clause is also in the purchase and sale agreement. It's also in the listing agreement. South Carolina Association of Realtors does have free mediators, by the way. That's just something to keep in mind, because it used to be one of the arguments to prevent mediation was that you had to pay the mediator. There are some options to not have to do that. 9 times out of 10, again, if it's handled within, I honestly haven't seen a mediation between client and agent in a very long time. We see it quite often between agents and maybe even buyer and seller, but not client and agent. Sex offender criminal information is something that I can't share with you as your broker, so you would have to go look that up. And that's really more of a reliability and liability clause, because that information is updated regularly, and we wouldn't have a way to be on top of that. So that's something that you would have to do. This is the only agreement. It's a written agreement, including any additional terms set forth on this. It can be changed only by a subsequently written instrument signed by both parties. So this is where you would be able to say, working with me, yes, we are entering to an agreement here. However, I have an easy out clause. Or if you do want to terminate, here is where I would say it. We would just need both to sign a termination agreement, which there's a termination for buyer's agency NZIP forms. Section 17 would be any contingencies you have in there. We don't really see many of those, other than sometimes people will say they will kind of override this last line here by putting in the next one that either party may terminate this agreement through written communication, which would include email. Section 18 basically says we can fax machines, electronic signatures, emails are all ways to communicate. Now you can use these. It doesn't change the binding of something. Having something just email doesn't make it binding. Still has to be signed. Now that notice of it being signed can be sent via email. Surveillance says the buyer, basically you've been put on notice that some of the sellers may be surveilling the property. And if they are required and held to the same legal standards under South Carolina. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily disclose it. However, we just need to be aware that some properties may have surveillance, and we need to be aware of that in our conversations whilst in the property. So if we want to talk about how much you love it, great, let's do that in the car or the coffee house. If you want to talk about how much you hate it, same thing applies, right? Let's not do that on the front porch. You would be amazed at how we had a deal, go south, and it made it worse because the buyer's parents were running their mouth the front door with the ring or the whatever thing they had on there, and it was not good. The sellers were irate about what they were saying about their appliances. Anyway, people are a sensitive group. All right, this is a legally, but what was that?
I have a question about that. Don't they have to tell you if they're surveilling the property, so they could do it on the DL and you not know it? You just assume that they may or may not be surveilling the property.
They can. I think it's like I don't know the exact laws on it, but it's like a Ring camera, for instance, doesn't have to be disclosed, and there's a reason for that. I think it's because it's video, not audio. Okay. And I think if it's audio, not video, then they may have to disclose. I'm not positive on that.
Okay.
Do you suggest talking to your clients and going and looking at a house that there might be a an Alexa, there might be something there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, hey, you know, and I would use this paragraph to say, look, as we go in these houses, I don't know what the specific laws were. I also know that it doesn't really kind of matter, because if they are doing it, they're doing it. And I don't know if the battle wants to be like, oh, you didn't do this correctly. Let's just not have confidential conversations while we're in the house. All right. And it's amazing how we had a listing that we were negotiating for. And he was like, look, like I said from the beginning, when they were there, they all sat down on the sofa and were chatting about the house, looked comfortable. They want this house. So I'm going to hold out a little bit longer in the negotiation. And I was like, that's actually a really good point. I mean, and that's all because he had a surveillance camera in his house and he saw them. I mean, they made themselves at home. They were like sitting and like pointing and loving the living room. He was like, that's a good sign to me. They want the house.
Joseph, I had the opposite thing happen. I had a client that was rogue that would use a nanny cam.
Oh.
And he, when I would call to give feedback, he says, well, that's not what they said when they were at the house. And I'm like, really? How do you know what they were saying when they were at the house? But he would watch, and it hurt my negotiation with my listing client, my seller client.
Mm-hmm.
As his interpretation would be one thing. He didn't get to see all the other homes they saw and their reaction to those.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. We had Lynn's cousin actually told us that they had their house on the market and they just weren't getting good feedback and they couldn't figure it out. And she set up a recording device in there over like the long weekend. And it worked out really well for their agent, because she basically the next day made a list of everything everyone said and went and changed it. And got that. I know. I was like, that's not always how that works out. So, all right. So rest of this is basically, it's a legally binding agreement. We're going to send you a receipt of this. If you have any questions, you also do want to make sure that you consult an attorney. And we've explained to you the brokerage relationships, everyone signs, and then we're good. Questions? Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, there's your buyer agency agreement in 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Joseph.
Of course.
Really appreciate the suggestion too. The Millionaire Real Estate Agent Leadership Edition has been really good. Actually, because I'm kind of a nerd, read a little bit of this week and I really like it. It's really
Nice.
Great suggestion.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Joseph.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Everybody have a great day. Let me know if you need anything.
You do the same. Thank you.